Austrian class Londinium 90 AD, asking ourselves over a cup of wine, what happened to the Republic? And we don't miss it. An emperor is a good idea. Well, Michael and John are observing now, here in the 21st century, is the Republic slipping away? Is that a good thing? Are we watching a civil war that will tear the Republic apart? We're not sure. You do not know you're in a civil war at the time. Later on, you look back. The Romans invented civil war 2,000 years ago, and it broke apart the Republic and replaced with an emperor. Is that where we're headed? Michael, a very good evening to you. Show trial. It's been a subject of ours for some weeks, and I submit to you an example that comports with your observations in A New Civil War, the website, An American Civil War, anewcivilwar.org. I read from the closing remarks of the lead impeachment manager for the Democrats, prosecuting or seeking or in some way engaging in the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump, now an ex-president. Mr. Raskin of Maryland says, tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this saving consolation. The more difficult the struggle, the more glorious in the end will be our victory, end quote. That is Tom Paine, 1776. Michael, the Democrats believe they are saving America from the devil. Michael, the devil. It's not enough to call those of us who voted for Donald Trump supporting a tyranny. They find that we're practicing deviltry. Good evening to you, Michael.
Good evening, John. You know, the show trial is a form of extravagant theater, like a grand opera, and yet it is occurring on the political stage. And it has all sorts of sacred aspects in the sense that those who are in a position to stage a show trial are seeking to use that massive dramatic or even melodramatic opportunity to create an incredible orchestration of their legitimacy, of their majesty and power. In other words, they are putting on a fantastic national performance whose goal is essentially to beat down and reduce to submission their former political rivals. And the best way to do that is to transform these rivals into not simply an enemy, because that's always been true, and certainly in the politics of the United States in the last decade or so, but to transform them into raw evil, to call them traitors in the sense that they have betrayed the very essence, the deep spirit of America in such a way that they no longer deserve to be seen as equals, to wield power, and not to be a part of the political process until they are brought to their knees and until they're punished collectively and are then put through some sort of abnegation and redemption that allows them to rejoin the political process. And altogether, this is a way to essentially assert the power and legitimacy of the party putting on the grand denunciation, judgment, and punishment that is a show trial, in order to reduce their opponents, and to do so in a way that keeps the party in power as a kind of a one-party system for as long as possible. And the essence of the show trial is to stage an event in which that is not only made clear, but that is so overwhelming in its dramatic staging that it not only overwhelms the public, the electorate, so that they accept this interpretation, but it also reduces these now traitorous and evil opponents, enemies, into long-term submission.
All right, let's go to two examples you've guided me to. This is the Dred Scott decision announced by the then new President Buchanan in 1857, and John Brown's prosecution and hanging in 1859. Both of them were versions of a show trial. How does that exemplify what's going on now, Michael?
Well, in the 1850s, the United States was splitting apart, much as it is today. And the party that was on the defensive were called the Democrats. And the Democrats were they were the bastions of the peculiar institution called slavery. And they felt that the spirit of the age worldwide and in the United States was moving increasingly against them and their position. And so their defensive stance was to keep slavery inviolate. And because in the 1850s, and for decades before that, the South had generally, the Democrats had generally dominated almost like a one-party system, the U.S. government. And in the 1850s, they owned all three branches of government. Essentially, they sought to create a situation where slavery would be untouchable. And the only way to do that was to make slavery a national institution that all Americans, whether they were from anti-slave states or not, had to essentially acknowledge and buy into slavery as a government anointed institution. And that came through in the Dred Scott decision, where all Americans had to essentially swear fealty to the Fugitive Slave Act, and where Northerners had to return slaves, where people were criminal if they did not. And it was a situation that the South had orchestrated because they owned the Supreme Court. But instead of beating down the North into submission, it rekindled an enormous sense of determination and resistance to overthrow what the North called the slave power. So it, in effect, had the opposite impact. And then just a couple years later, you have the raid on Harper's Ferry by John Brown and his crew, and they're captured and put on trial, and there is Brown, who is going to be made an example, essentially by the South, and hanged, and this is going to be a warning to all in the North not to pursue the politics of extremism. John Brown was painted as a political extremist, as a domestic terrorist, and here he was and his crew being hanged, and this would be a warning to the North. Well, the opposite happened again, and the North became, they dug in their heels. This was the last straw for them. So, in effect, the show trial, which is being deployed by a dominant party that is in a position of power to basically force the submission of their former competitors and rivals by making them enemies and ultimately making them evil and prescribing them, actually boomerangs. And this is true of show trials in other places and times, in France and Russia. And this is a warning to us, and should be a warning to Blue today, that they're not overstepping their bounds. They're actually going further and creating the very sort of determination to go to battle that we saw in the 1850s.
And at the time, Michael, I just mentioned the irony. After John Brown was hanged, there was a sign at the door of the old Senate, "Check your guns," which is exactly what I thought of when I heard that there were metal detectors to enter the House of Representatives. Right now. And that the security in and around the Congress now wands members of